I didn't know how clearly my family had ranked me until my mother said it out loud at dinner. It wasn't an emotional outburst. There were no tears, no raised voices, no slamming of silverware. It was just a calm, cold statement of fact, as if she were reading the weather report. "Your sister's family always comes first, Mia," she said, cutting her steak with terrifying precision. "You're always last. That's just the way the math works." My dad nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving his plate, as if she had just explained a basic law of physics. My sister, the golden child of our Denver suburb, simply smirked into her wine glass, enjoying the vintage of her own superiority. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't even flinch. I just set my fork down and said, "Good to know." Because in that moment, something snapped. It wasn't my heart, that had been bruised too many times to feel a fresh break. It was my loyalty. The invisible tether that had kept me performing the role of the reliable one for 30 years simply evaporated. Before I tell you how I turned their own logic against them, take a second to hit like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, have you ever realized you were the backup plan in your own family? The gravity of the golden child. I grew up in an ordinary house in Denver. Trimmed lawn, neutral paint, the perfect suburban facade. But inside those walls, attention was a commodity that flowed toward my sister like water down a steep hill. She had a gravity I didn't. When she stumbled, the whole family rushed to catch her. When I fell, they told me I was tough enough to get back up on my own. I was the daughter they loved in theory, but neglected in practice. My birthdays were grocery store cakes bought on the way home. Hers were events planned months in advance. My milestones were expected, so they went uncelebrated. Her mediocre achievements were treated like Olympic gold. I paid my own way through community college, working double shifts at a diner while she had her tuition, housing, and social life fully funded. Every time I succeeded, it quietly reinforced the lie my parents told themselves. See? Mia's fine. She doesn't need us. By the time I moved to Seattle for a high-level corporate job, I was fluent in the language of being supportive, while my own life unfolded in the shadows. I was the family's infrastructure, the silent beams holding up a house I wasn't allowed to live in. The quiet separation. After that dinner, nothing changed on the surface. My parents didn't call to apologize, because they didn't think they'd done anything wrong. They had simply told the truth. But I began a quiet, surgical separation. For years, I had been the silent funder. I'd cover the accidental, bounced payments for my sister. I'd spot my mom for her temporary medical bills. I kept my schedule flexible in case they needed me to fly back and solve a crisis. No more. I moved my money into private accounts. I revoked shared access to my streaming services and emergency credit lines. I stopped answering the phone on the first ring. When my sister texted me asking to spot her for a weekend getaway, I replied with a simple, "I can't." The reaction was immediate. The confusion in my mother's voice when she called was almost comical. "Are you okay, Mia? You seem distant. You know your sister is under so much pressure right now." "No," I said. "I'm just busy." What I was realizing was that my strength was just their favorite excuse to be lazy. The emergency call. The real test came on a Tuesday afternoon. My mother's voice was tight, the sound of someone standing on a crumbling ledge. "We need to talk. Can you come to Denver this weekend?" I knew the sound. It was the sound of an expensive mistake. When I walked into that house, the air felt stale. The dining room table was buried under a mountain of notices, red ink, bold letters, final warnings. A business investment by my sister's husband had collapsed. They had over-leveraged everything. They were weeks away from losing the house, the cars, and the perfect life I had been indirectly subsidizing for years. They sat there, waiting for the rescue. "You're in a stable place, Mia," my dad said, clearing his throat. "You don't have kids. You have that big salary in Seattle. You can handle this better than we can." The assumption was breathtaking. They didn't ask, they expected. I was the safety net. I was the last in line, which apparently meant I was the one who had to carry everyone else's weight, treating them like a bank. I didn't argue. Instead, I asked, "What's the plan if I don't help?" The room went deathly silent. My mother looked hurt, my dad looked offended, and my sister looked like she was about to have a panic attack. To them, not helping wasn't even a mathematical possibility. I need 24 hours, I said, and I walked out. I spent that night in my childhood bedroom, the one that had always been smaller than my sister's, and I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. The next morning, I returned with a folder. It wasn't a check. It was a legal contract. I will cover the debt, I said, sliding the folder across the table. But this isn't a gift. This is a structured loan. My dad opened it, his face draining of color as he read. There are conditions, interest, asset liquidation. Mia, this is cold. This is how a bank treats people. Exactly, I replied. When you needed emotional support, I was family. But since you've made it clear I'm always last in that department, then for the purpose of this transaction, I am infrastructure. I am a lender. The terms were non-negotiable. Asset sales. My sister's luxury SUV and their vacation timeshare had to be sold immediately. Accountability. Every cent of their spending had to be documented and sent to me monthly. Mandatory therapy. They had to attend family counseling to address the toxic hierarchy. Legal recourse. If they missed a payment, I would place a lien on the house. You don't trust us, my mom whispered, her eyes filling with tears. I trust patterns, I said. And the pattern is that you spend, and I pay. That pattern ends today. Sign the papers, or watch the bank take the house. You have 24 hours. The new hierarchy. They signed. They didn't have a choice. The aftermath wasn't a movie ending. There were no tearful reunions. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one carrying the burden. By forcing them to be accountable, the emergency energy in the family evaporated. Without me to catch them, they finally learned how to walk. My sister looks at me differently now, with a strange mix of fear and respect. My parents call me to ask how my day was, not because they've suddenly become perfect parents, but because they know I am no longer the strong one who will take their hits. I realized something profound sitting in my apartment in Seattle. Being last was never a position I had to accept. It was a sign that I needed to leave the line entirely. I chose myself. And for the first time, I'm the only priority that matters. If this story stirred something inside you, don't scroll away in silence. Tap like. It tells us these stories deserve to be told. Subscribe to Vengeful Goddess for unforgettable tales of betrayal, resilience, and justice, stories you won't hear anywhere else. Turn on the bell icon, so the next story reaches you the moment it drops.